We are back here on the Analytical Iowan podcast. It is Tuesday, November 11th, as you are listening to this. It is Veterans Day, and I want to thank all of the veterans out there for all of the service they have given and for everything they did to help protect and defend this country. So, happy Veterans Day to everybody out there who is a veteran, and now let's get into it. So, the Senate did pass that deal we talked about yesterday. It passed yesterday. This is not the best deal Democrats could have gotten. And I know some people are bitching and complaining that the Democrats caved. Well, they did. Um, but they may end up ultimately playing the Republicans. Now, some people are suggesting that Chuck Schumer was behind this whole deal. He got 8 Democrats who were not up for reelection until either 28 or 30. Some who have said they are not going to seek reelection after this term to come up with this budget deal. And I don't know if that's true or not. But what they did do is they got Republicans to turn around and say, okay, we promise a vote in December on the Affordable Care Act subsidies. And I know I've said I don't trust a Republican promise, and I don't necessarily trust this promise either. But um, here's the thing: if the Republicans don't follow through, once again, Democrats can put it at the Republicans' feet. Not the best outcome for the American people, but I don't think they were going to get anywhere with these negotiations. Um, Republicans got offered the best deal they could have possibly gotten, and were still willing to keep the government shut down rather than accept it. That deal was um, that they only extended the Affordable Care Act subsidies by 1 year. And basically, no other changes, and it would have been the House CR plus that little bit. And they didn't want to take it. So, what the Democrats do instead? They negotiated a better deal. Now, this deal funds everything in the government till January 30th. So that means end of January, they're going to be back trying to negotiate another extension. But certain things in the government will be extended out till the end of the fiscal year, which is next September. Now, next September, they are not going to want to go through a government shutdown fight again, and I expect Republicans would be more willing to deal than to keep the government open because the midterms would be right around the corner. If this shutdown fight had happened uh, next year instead of this year, you could have expected Republicans to get completely wiped out in the election. I mean, the election we had for what was up for grabs, they got wiped out anyway. But having a government shutdown during the midterm election year would be even worse, especially only a month away from the election. Now, Democrats got certain things that will be funded till the end of the year, which includes SNAP benefits, it includes military pay, it includes essential worker pay, and all of those things are things that Republicans tried to use against Democrats in order to get them to cave on the shutdown. So now, if they have to go back after it and shut the government back down in January, all of the Republican talking points about why the Democrats should open the government will be gone. The other thing that they got in there was a rehire of any of the people that were fired by Donald Trump because of the shutdown. Now, that is something Donald Trump says he is going to abide by the terms of the deal to reopen the government and he'll sign it. But I wonder if he really will. He acts on instinct, he acts on emotion, he does not do things the way a normal person would. And right now, if he looks at it as a loss because it was for him, he's having his power taken away. And he is saying, well, I wanted to fire those people and now I have to rehire them. He's not going to like that. It also includes back pay for those people that were fired by Donald Trump if they come back to work. So not only do they get their job back, but they get paid for the whole time they were gone. Okay, that's good for them. Donald Trump may not sign it. So what happens next? Well, it has passed the Senate. It goes on to the House of Representatives. Now, they have recalled the House of Representatives. They may be in session today. They were not in session yesterday, but they would probably be in session sometime this week. And Mike Johnson says he is going to swear in Representative Grijalva one day this week. Didn't say which day. And we'll get to that in a minute. But when the House comes back, they have to vote on this bill. And if they change anything at all, it goes back to the Senate to get revoted on. Now, this is where I wonder if the Democrats didn't um, play Senate Republicans. Now, maybe Senate Democrats had some Republicans they talked to from the House of Representatives. They only need two or three that would be reasonably minded, that would be willing to break party ranks and agree to change this bill to go with all Democrats, and they would have a change that would go back to the Senate to be voted on. Now, we already know some Republicans are breaking ranks with the Republican Party. You have Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, Thomas Massie, and I can't think of the other one, the four that have signed off on the discharge petition to release the Epstein files. If they are willing, and Marjorie Taylor Greene being one of them complaining about the rising cost of healthcare, if you get four Republicans that are willing to say, hey, we need to do something about these Affordable Care Act credits, maybe we extend it by a year or two, since they haven't been around to negotiate, maybe they put something on the bill. It's entirely possible. Now, Mike Johnson originally said he wasn't going to vote for anything that um, came out of the Senate that wasn't the CR that they passed. But because this doesn't have the Affordable Care Act subsidies in it, and it seems like a dream win for Republicans, he will at least bring it up for a vote. But once it passes the House, if they've changed it at all, and I'm thinking it's possible, again, maybe this is wishful thinking, but if the House fixes it and puts on the Affordable Care Act subsidies and sends it back to the Senate, those subsidies could still get through, and it still may pass the Senate by the end of the week, and Donald Trump could sign it by the end of the week. Now, this wouldn't be the first time the Senate has tried to use the House of Representatives to fix a bill. Remember earlier this summer with the One Big Beautiful Bill? They weren't happy with it. And even some Republicans, like Lisa Murkowski, Josh Hawley, were complaining about some of the cuts. And they thought they were too steep. They voted for it anyway, but they thought they were too steep. They sent it back to the House of Representatives, and they were hoping the House would fix their bill. The House ultimately just passed it as is, but they were hoping that the House would fix it. Maybe that's what's going on here, is that maybe Senate Democrats and House Republicans and House Democrats were talking together, and maybe they have a plan to fix it in the House and get it kicked back to the Senate. It's entirely possible. I'm not uh, trying to give anybody false hope here and say that this is definitely what is going to happen. I'm just throwing out an idea of what may be going on behind the scenes. And if that happens, Senate Republicans are going to look foolish. The Democrats that negotiated this deal are going to look like geniuses, and they're going to look like winners. And you're going to have um, people like Chuck Schumer who have come out against this deal. They're still going to look like the good guy here and that they were doing enough. Now, Hakeem Jeffries, the House Minority Leader, has said that pretty much the entire Democratic caucus is going to vote against this bill. And like I said, it will only take three or four Republicans to break ranks. The bill doesn't go anywhere, and they would have to potentially debate and amend it. Well, it's possible. Again, I'm just looking at things that could happen. Now, Donald Trump has said if it gets to his desk, he is going to sign it. Now, I don't know if that is at least what he's saying right now, with the deal being what it is with the Senate passing this version. If the House changes it at all, I don't know if that's going to change Donald Trump's mood. If they extend the Affordable Care Act subsidies, then it passes the Senate with the subsidies in. I don't know what he wants to do, because Donald Trump has come out the last few days and he is pushing for this idea of, instead of doing Affordable Care Act subsidies, he just wants to give payments direct to taxpayers. Okay. How does that help? It's doing the same thing with more steps. So instead of paying the insurance company a subsidy to lower the price of healthcare, he's going to give you, the taxpayer, an amount of money that you're supposed to spend on healthcare, but your healthcare just went up. Okay, so you're going to be paying a higher premium. All of that money is basically going to be there to offset the cost of your premiums all year. But we know how people are, and I know a lot of people when the money's in their bank account, they find it hard to keep it around because this bill comes up. Oh, well, I got to pay this right now. And instead of trying to figure out how to raise the money if they don't have it, knowing they've got to set aside some other money to do like insurance premiums or whatever, um, they would dip into that and say, well, I'll be able to put it back in 2 weeks when I get paid again. Something like that. Um, and this could end up being really bad. This could end up really hurting people when it comes to paying for their insurance. But see, Donald Trump doesn't care about any of that. He's looking for the win. He wants to send people the check so they get a check with from the president Donald J. Trump on it again, like they did during COVID, or like the farmers did when he bailed them out during his first administration. He wants to give them money so they cheer for him and they think he's doing a great job. Ultimately, this could blow up in his face. This could backfire. But Donald Trump doesn't think 2 steps ahead. He's looking for ways out and around the current problems that he has going on. All right. Now, mentioned Representative Grijalva a little bit ago. Representative Grijalva, according to Mike Johnson, will be sworn in one day this week. Don't know which day, probably whatever day they come back into session. Now, one of the first things she is going to do is sign off on the discharge petition for the Epstein files. And she would be vote number 218. Now, I want to cover this again because I'm still seeing people making videos and talking about it, and I'm seeing some comments. There is a special election in Tennessee, and it is for a normally, traditionally Republican district. And that is coming up on December 2nd. And some people are saying and suggesting that if the Republican wins there, that changes the math and makes it 219 that they need, and they won't be able to release the files anyway, or they won't be able to have the vote. And that is just not true. The reason the number is 218 is the House of Representatives is currently sitting at 435 total members if everybody was there. Now, there are some open seats, but that doesn't matter for this math. You divide that 435 maximum number in half, you get 217 and a half. Well, you can't have half a person. So, in order to have a true majority, you have to be at 218. Now, there is no tiebreak rule. There is no filibuster in the House of Representatives. So, if they get to any number other than a true majority, it fails. That's why you need 218 on something like this, and you must bring 218 to get this discharge petition. It's half of the full complement if everybody was there. Representative Grijalva will be vote number 218. It does not matter if a Republican wins in Tennessee or not. They will be a vote against it, or they won't sign for it, whatever, but it doesn't matter. Now, Mike Johnson does not want to call for a vote on the Epstein files. He says he'll do it. He won't block it. But we can tell by what he has been doing ever since she won her seat, I believe, 6 weeks ago now. He has kept her out of her seat. He has refused to swear her in, which has kept her out from getting access to payroll, getting access to her budget, getting access to her computer systems, her phone lines, the internet, all of those things to where she could actually do the job she was elected to do. But he's been doing it to avoid this vote on the Epstein files. Now, some people believe incorrectly that when they hold the vote on the Epstein files in the House, that it would automatically force the files to be released. That is not true. This is on getting Republicans on the record for opening or the Epstein files to the public. And who wants to keep them hidden? Who wants to show everybody? Now, how is this vote going to go? At minimum, it is going to go with, I would think, all 218 signatures on the discharge petition that want to bring it up for a vote are going to vote in favor of it. Okay. Then beyond that, we may have a bunch of Republicans that break ranks trying to get this thing out there because they don't want to be on record as having voted in favor of the discharge or of keeping the files hidden. Okay. They don't want to go on that record because they don't want to answer to their voters. Now, you could have some of them that vote to keep them hidden, turn around and not answer their voters by not running for election because some of members have already said, we're not running, I'm running for a different office, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. But you may have a bunch of Republicans that vote to release the files. And we don't know what's going to happen when the Senate votes on it. We don't. The Senate could vote to keep it hidden. The Senate could vote to authorize it. That is up in the air. That is up for debate. But um, the simple fact of the matter is, House Republicans, all of them, or House members in general, are all going to be up for election in the midterm. So they get elected every 2 years in mass. And they don't necessarily want to be answerable to the voters for this. Now, Donald Trump ran on a campaign of releasing the Epstein files. And why would he do something like that? Well, he ran on this campaign of releasing the Epstein files because he thought he could get in. He said he would promise to release them because he knows MAGA wants to see him, because MAGA has been told for years that Democrats and left leaning people do all these horrible things to children. And he figured he could run on a campaign of releasing the Epstein files. And then that would turn around getting to where he would have an opportunity to do something with them, like what he tried to do with Pam Bondi, and come out and say, well, there's nothing here. Jeffrey Epstein didn't traffic these girls to anybody but himself and Ghislaine Maxwell, and call it good. And that's a problem. See, he was hoping that he could control the narrative. It didn't work, because every time he tried to control the narrative, the cries from the MAGA voters and his MAGA base just got louder to release the files. They didn't believe the bullshit he was trying to sell. So if his best option, if he wanted to keep the files hidden, actually would have been to not run for president. Now, that wasn't the only reason he ran for president, was to control the release of the Epstein files. Not at all. It was just one of the factors that played into it. Kamala Harris was not running on any sort of a campaign to release the files. She had other things she was worrying about. So if Donald Trump wanted to keep them hidden and he didn't run for president, they probably wouldn't be being talked about right now. But see, this is when people like myself and the Rational Boomer and others say Donald Trump always fucks up. This is what we're talking about. He brought up the Epstein files. He brought up needing to release them. He brought up all of it. And here we are. Files are being talked about, and there is a push to release them. He could have left well enough alone, but he was the one who brought it up. Okay. So they bring this vote for releasing the files to the floor. Now, what happens when 100 or 150 Republicans out of the 218 they have break ranks? What happens? Does Donald Trump try to primary all of them? He's already said anybody who votes in favor of releasing the Epstein files is hostile to this administration. So does he break ranks? Or does he try to primary all of them and go after them? Or does he hope the Senate keeps it buried? Now, either way, if the Senate passes it, Donald Trump's never going to sign this thing into law. But if the number that pass it in both chambers is large enough, they can pass it again around his veto. And in fact, that may change what happens if he does veto it. If they're close, they may be able to get enough people on board to pass it around his veto. They may be able to talk more people into it, especially when they start seeing the public outcry about the files, especially when Donald Trump vetoes it. So this is not going to be good for Donald Trump when it comes to the Epstein files. But see, Mike Johnson has a problem. He's got multiple problems, but there's a lot of people pissed off at Mike Johnson right now. So what happens when they get back? They swear in Representative Grijalva, and they pass the Epstein file list. They pass that vote. Donald Trump could call one of his allies in Congress and say, "Hey, I'm sick of Mike Johnson. Get rid of him." And they hold a vote to vacate the chair. It only takes 3 or 4 Republicans and all Democrats, and Mike Johnson's gone. Democrats have no way to, or no reason to protect him. They don't have to. They could, but they don't have to. Now, this ties back into what I was talking about earlier with the funding bill that came from the Senate. Now, what happens with that? Well, they they need to add the Affordable Care Act subsidies onto this, okay? And they need to do that. What could Democrats go to Mike Johnson and say, "Hey, we got a deal for you. You get somebody to sponsor this. You make sure you have enough votes to put the Affordable Care Act subsidies on for, say, a year or two. You make sure it happens. We'll make sure it gets tacked on there, and if they call to vacate the chair, we'll save you. Could it happen? Yeah, it could. Democrats could potentially save Mike Johnson. Now, why would they? Well, I don't think they have to worry about answering to their voters for saving Mike Johnson. Voters don't like Mike Johnson by any stretch of the imagination, but I don't know that any voters care if he is Speaker of the House right now. Um, not enough that they would be as pissed as say not passing the Affordable Care Act subsidies, something like that. That they would be willing to primary out a representative over saving Mike Johnson. But the thing is, if they use Mike Johnson to get this tacked on to the Affordable Care Act or onto the spending bill, these Affordable Care Act subsidies, um, that would be huge. And I could see Democrats doing something like that. They did that with Kevin McCarthy when he was Speaker. At least once they saved him because they had negotiated a spending bill. And um, basically they said, okay, you get the spending bill out, we get it passed. And if they vote you out, if they try to vote you out, we'll save you. And they did. So they could do the same thing for Mike Johnson, this time with their list of demands. Now, they already got some of the demands I thought they would get in negotiations already in the Senate. I kind of thought those might get negotiated when the bill came back to the House, but here we are. So Mike Johnson could be facing a vote to vacate the chair because of this funding bill, but he could also be facing a vote to vacate the chair of the Epstein files. And again, Democrats could tie it all together, and they could go with any vote to vacate the chair. Doesn't matter the reason that they save him, as long as they get him through the Affordable Care Act subsidies on this spending bill. Again, it's entirely possible. Just looking at things as they could happen, um, and it's maybe something that people didn't think of. Now, a lot of people are pissed about this spending deal, rightfully so. They're mad that Democrats caved. But if Republicans weren't willing to open the government when they had been given the best option they could be given, which was just 1 year of Affordable Care Act subsidies, I don't know if they would have ever opened the government. Now, some people are suggesting that uh, it could have been a year, or that it could have been a few days, and Republicans would have fully caved. Well, I don't know. I don't know if they would have. They weren't taking the heat yet, and they actually believed they were winning the shutdown fight. So does Donald Trump. He thought he was winning this thing. And because they're delusional like that, they they might have been willing to hold on to it for a lot longer. And Donald Trump liked having the government shut down, because with the government shut down, they did not have to talk about the Epstein files. They weren't going to hold this vote. They weren't going to do any of those things, and there wasn't any oversight for the things that he did. Now, with the government opening back up, those committees that he just ignored when it came to tearing down the east wing of the White House to build this ballroom, they're going to be back once they come back up. Now, what could happen with any of it? No idea, because Donald Trump has put loyalists on a lot of those committees, so they probably won't do anything. Um, but he didn't put the loyalists on there until after the government was shut down. So he definitely used the shutdown for his own advantages. Now, Donald Trump took to Truth Social in a late night post before I recorded this, where he was talking about the Supreme Court and the harm that would come from having to repay the tariffs if they rule against him. And I think he's really terrified that they are going to rule against him. This has been his benchmark policy. This has been the one thing that he has been using uh, his whole administration about dictating foreign policy. Basically, was, if you don't like me, I'm putting tariffs on you. Never mind the fact that the tariffs are paid by the American people, not the foreign countries. But he doesn't care about that. He likes to think that if he says he's putting a 50% tariff on Canada, that the money comes from the Canadian Treasury into the US Treasury, and that's the end of it. But see, what would happen, or what does happen, is these companies pay the tariff at the port, and they pass the cost on to the American consumer. And one of the things that they're talking about with this Supreme Court case is that if the Supreme Court overturns his tariff ability, all of the money collected would have to be returned. Well, it would go back to the companies that paid it initially. Well, they could just eat that as pure profit at that point because, well, they're not going to refund it to customers and they're not going to probably lower their prices. They'll just put it on their bottom line, call it a rebate and move on. I don't think they're going to use it to do any sort of new investment. They're not going to pay higher wages. They're not going to do any of that. And now that we're already paying the higher prices, I don't expect many things to go down in price. I could be wrong about that. And if I am, I'll gladly admit it if that's what happens. But most companies, when they get you paying a higher price, they rarely go down permanently. Unless, it isn't a thing. The only time prices typically go down is if a product is being discontinued, and then they just lower it until they get rid of what they have, and then they never bring it back. At least that's been my experience in all the years I've been around. That's what I've seen stores and companies do. So Donald Trump is railing against how hard it would be to bring to pay back the tariffs, and of course he had to inflate the numbers again. And some estimates are saying it's only been 90 billion. I heard 300 and some billion was the number. But according to Donald Trump in this Truth Social post, he's claiming it is closer to $9 trillion. Well, Donald Trump likes to inflate numbers. We know this. He talks about his crowd size, uh, his poll numbers, all of that. They always have to be way higher than what they are. When he talks about lowering prescription drug prices, he kept saying he was going to lower it by 1,500%. Well, that would mean I would get money back every time I go get a prescription filled. And we know that ain't going to happen. So Donald Trump and numbers aren't the most reliable, but he claims they brought in over $9 trillion that they would have to pay back. And the problem is the money's not there. Despite the fact that he's been spending money like it's going out of style and we don't know what budgets he's pulling from. Um, Simply put, the US government runs on a deficit spending. We are spending more money than we bring in. So we're constantly borrowing money to pay those bills. So we're constantly paying interest on the money we borrow. So as soon as it comes in, it's going out in the form of interest on the loans that we have paid, just keeping the cycle going. The 9 trillion is not sitting there somewhere. I guarantee you Donald Trump doesn't know that because he's still floating this idea of sending all the taxpayers a check. Again, much like sending them the Affordable Care Act subsidies directly, sending them a stimulus style check of a couple $1,000s, using it from the tariffs, claiming they've brought in so much money from the tariffs that they should do this. Well, here's the problem. If they really have brought in that much money from the tariffs, shouldn't our debt be going down? Number one. And number two, if they have the money to send it in, wouldn't it just be better to scrap the tariffs altogether, have us be paying lower prices, and just keep the money in the hands of the American taxpayer? Oh, but he doesn't want to do that. And he just wants to give everybody a check because he remembers how much he was cheered during COVID for sending out checks. People loved him during COVID when the economy ground to a halt and people were struggling to pay their bills, that he was able to get them checks and he thought it was such a great deal. Well, and I think that's why he's talking about doing these checks. Well, now when he was talking about how infeasible it was going to be to send the money back out because of the tariffs and stuff if the Supreme Court rules against him, I think he's trying to pressure the Supreme Court to side with him because he's scared that they're going to rule against him. And I think they will because the law they cite as having his ability to do the tariffs does not mention the word tariff or any of its synonyms anywhere. And simply put, according to the Constitution, the ability to levy tariffs are that power sits with Congress. It's not something that is inherently a power of the president or the executive branch. And then You have the fact that on those tariffs, the Senate has voted three times right before the Supreme Court was going to rule on the tariffs, saying we want to revoke the national emergency declarations that Donald Trump used to put the tariffs on. Basically, saying they wanted their power back to control the tariffs. They didn't agree with his use of them, which is giving the Supreme Court a roadmap into maybe how to rule on this case, specifically that Congress wants their tariff power to be restored. And Donald Trump is terrified about any and all of that happening. So he's trying to pressure the Supreme Court to side with him. And I don't think it's going to work. All right, now talking about the Supreme Court, they actually did something that caught a lot of people off guard. I believe it was yesterday. They had taken up an emergency appeal where they at least were going to consider on an emergency basis, or maybe it wasn't an emergency. Anyway, they took up an appeal anyway. They were going to consider from Kim Davis. I believe she was the Kentucky clerk of court. Might have been Tennessee. I don't remember which now. But you might remember Kim Davis. She was one of the clerks of court right after the Obergefell decision. Anyway, she refused to issue same-sex couples marriage licenses based on her religious beliefs, and saying that, well, by forcing her to issue the marriage licenses, it went against her freedom of religion. Well, she got fired. And she was suing to, one, have them look at overturning Obergefell, and she was going to want to have all of the damages, which is in the, I believe, hundreds of thousands of dollars at this point that she owes, um, reduced or overturned completely. Well, the Supreme Court has declined to hear her case. They looked at it and they said, yeah, we're not touching that. So they're not going to review Obergefell. And some people thought they were going to do it, and this was going to be the end, and they were going to overturn gay marriage in this country. Now, gay marriage right now is only upheld by a Supreme Court decision. And the way this works is the Supreme Court has looked at the Constitution, and they said, okay, based on the 14th Amendment of equal protection to everybody, that we can't discriminate between same-sex couples and heterosexual couples, period. Either side can get a marriage license, but it's not enshrined into law anywhere. So what could happen? Well, another Supreme Court case could come up like this one attempted to, and they could overturn that, like what happened with Roe v. Wade. In the 70s, Roe v. Wade came to the Supreme Court, and they said, based on the right to people having a right to privacy based on the 14th Amendment, and an abortion being a private medical decision, that the right to get an abortion was guaranteed via the U.S. Constitution. But it was never enshrined as a law anywhere, and there was never anything else done with it. So when I can't think of the Supreme Court case now, but a couple of years ago when that case came up, um, they turned around and overturned Roe v. Wade and said, no, there's not a right to an abortion in the uh, U.S. Constitution. And they didn't quite say there isn't a right to privacy, but they tried, basically, they said, well, that it's not necessarily a private matter if you get one. It was complicated, but effectively that's what allowed all of these states to do their own variations of abortion bans. And a lot of people were worried that when they took this Kim Davis's case up, that they were going to overturn Obergefell and overturn same-sex marriage, and they didn't. Now, ultimately, what should happen is at some point Congress should pass a law, or, and this is even the harder option, they should pass a Supreme Court amendment guaranteeing those rights. And once you attach it as an amendment to the Constitution, no amendment has ever been overturned by a court as unconstitutional. We have had one amendment repealed by a different amendment, and that was the amendment that prohibited the consumption or sale of or making of alcohol. And after about 3 years, they realized that was a bad idea. So, um, That's what they really should do with it. But the Supreme Court has decided to not hear this case on whether or not to overturn Obergefell. And that is very surprising. The Supreme Court is way more conservative than it was when they decided um, Obergefell. Uh, Justice Kennedy, who was on the court at the time, he decided to retire during Donald Trump's term. He got replaced. I think that was he was replaced by Kavanaugh. You had um, see Anton Scalia. I think he was still on the court, and he was replaced by a conservative. And you had Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who passed away and was replaced by Amy Coney Barrett. I mean, the Supreme Court is 6-3, very conservative, where before it was 5-4, and it was more like 4-4-1 because I think Kennedy, although conservative, he was more of a swing vote on a lot of cases. He was definitely more moderate. And this just is why this, who controls the Senate is very important, um, because they control who gets confirmed to the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, we talk about the midterms a lot and what can happen with the midterms, and I think it's possible that the Democrats take the Senate in the midterms. And if they do, Donald Trump will not be able to get another extremely conservative Supreme Court pick through. Democrats will block him all the way. They will either force him to end up picking somebody um, much more moderate, or if he keeps putting up very conservative people, they just keep blocking him all the way until the 2028 presidential, and there'd be an open seat for someone to be filled by the incoming president. Either of those two are options. Now, with the midterms coming up, we have to start watching primary races. And we'll have to see how this funding thing goes with funding the government. And if the scenario I laid out earlier, if that ends up being what happens, maybe we don't need to primary out the Democrats that are involved. If they get nothing out of this and the House passes this bill as is, and come December when they try to pass the Affordable Care Act subsidies, if it fails and we don't get those extended, then we need to start seriously looking at primarying out some of the more uh, conservative or moderate Democrats going in favor, especially in areas where the Democrats going to win no matter what. Now, if you got somebody, and I know he's no longer in the Senate, but if you had a Joe Manchin situation where they won in a deep red state, maybe you don't primary them out because they can do something where they can win in a deep red area. Um, but we need to start bringing in more conservatives or more progressive Democrats um, to counter some of these establishment Democrats that just want to do things the way it was in the 90s. Some people who wouldn't be afraid to leave the government shut down um, and keep forcing this fight until the Republicans cave on it. Um, so we got to be watching the primary fight here. But beyond that, uh, you have Donald Trump, who was talking to Fox News, and he was talking to Laura Ingraham about a bunch of things about the economy and stuff, and they actually started pushing back against Donald Trump. Now they cut him off. She did when she was asking him a question about something I talked about on yesterday's podcast, this 50-year mortgage idea. And she said something about, well, you're pushing for this 50-year mortgage. And he's like, well, it's not really that big of a deal. You just go from 40 to 50 years. And she goes, no, it's 30 to 50 years. It's a 20-year difference. Well, they went from 30 to 40 and now 40 to 50. And Donald Trump just starts spewing a bunch of stuff. But they were pushing back against him a little bit. And he said, well, it's not really that big of a deal going to a 50-year mortgage. It's not a big deal. This is coming from the man who is a supposed billionaire, who has probably never gone grocery shopping. He's never had to worry about paying his bills. I mean, we know he doesn't pay his bills anyway. But he goes ahead And he says it's not that big of a deal to add 20 years onto a mortgage. I'm in my 40s, and that was the other thing she mentioned. She goes, "Well, most of the home buyers are 40 years old or in their 40s now, and they're buying a home for the first time." And he tried to, of course, spin it. Well, Joe Biden inherited that. And she goes, "Well, wait a minute. So what you're saying is you give them a 50-year mortgage, they'd be in their 90s. Well, it's not really that big of a deal if it gets you a lower payment." I'm sorry, what? Yeah, your payment's going to be lower, but the only people this benefits is the banks. You will be paying way more overall interest. The interest rates are much higher right now, and it's going to take you longer to build any sort of equity in your house. Imagine having a 50-year mortgage and you go with it. And now I haven't looked at the actual amortization schedule on it, but I guarantee you, it probably in 10 years, you're probably not going to pay off 10% of the house. Okay. So unless you gain a bunch of value on your house, how does that help you? It really doesn't. You just made the banks a lot of money. And who's going to get these? Who's going to get these 50-year mortgages? Well, it's not going to be people with great credit that are going to get the better interest rates that are going to be able to afford a traditional 30-year. No, unless they do away with them altogether. Um, it's going to be the people who have to borrow on like the old subprime mortgages. If you're old enough, you will remember the old subprime mortgage problem of 2008. Now, there was a deal that was going on back then, and I was in my early 20s. I don't remember it that well, but because I wasn't looking at buying a house back then. But effectively, what was going on, if I remember correctly, is you had a bunch of people that would go to these banks and they would get a loan at lower than the standard rate. Okay. So if the standard rate was 5%, the banks may offer them 3 or 4% rate, something like that. But in exchange for a lower rate, um, and it was only usually for higher risk people that got these deals, there would come a point at some point in their loan where they would have a balloon payment, and a balloon payment on a loan is something like you're cruising along and your payment on your mortgage is normally using prices right now. Let's say it's normally $900, okay, a month. And then to help get you that lower rate, the rest of the time, maybe you come up to one payment, or maybe it's several balloon payments. Maybe you have to make it every 5 years. I don't know. I don't remember the entire scale of how the subprime thing went, but I know there were balloon payments involved where, let's say, every February you had to come up with, instead of $900 on your mortgage payment, your price ballooned to 2,700 or 3,500. And they did it, usually a lot of places did it around tax time. That way people got their refund, they made the big payment, and as long as they made their payment, then their rate went right back down. Well, that worked out great for a little while. And then in 2008, it all came to a head. And that's when we had the housing crisis. Because what you had was banks offering lots of money to people who really couldn't afford it. And then they get hit with these balloon payments and everything else. And I had an extended family member. I remember they had a house. Um, and I'm not entirely sure what the house was worth at the time, but top end, it was worth 100K at best at the time. I don't even think it was worth that. And at least the talk through the family was that it was worth, that it had borrowed on the house over 500K. Now, I don't know if that was true. I remember that was what I overheard being talked about. Um, but they lost the house. Bank got the house back because they couldn't keep the payments going. Happens. Um, but they weren't the only ones affected by this. When the 2008 housing crisis collapsed, pretty much that's exactly what happened across the country. Lots and lots of people who couldn't afford these subprime mortgages, when they started getting hit with the balloon payments and everything else, um, it all came to a head. And That is when the federal government bought out Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, the two big mortgage lenders. They started doing things like the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau and doing a bunch of other things. They put a whole bunch of regulations in on lending to make sure that people could afford their mortgages. And Donald Trump and Republicans have been trying to scale back those regulations for a long time. And now he wants to go out and extend a 50-year mortgage. Okay, 50-year mortgage. And he acts like it's no big deal. Well, your payments are going to be lower, so it's a good thing. Yeah, your payments are going to be lower. But as I said yesterday, I believe retirement age right now is somewhere between 67 and 69 years old. On a 50-year loan, if you are 18, you go out, buy a house, and you're paying on it for 50 years, you are going to be lucky to have it paid off by the time you retire. I'm in my 40s. If I took out a 50-year loan right now, it would be uh, I'd be in my 90s before I retire, before I was done paying it off. Okay, that's insane. That would mean I would have to either keep working till I'm in my 90s to keep paying on a mortgage. Now, assuming cost of living goes up and I don't move and all of those things, I may actually have a relatively cheap mortgage payment by comparison. But the problem is, if you do a 50-year mortgage, then you have to do that. You have to keep working until it's paid off. Or if I was lucky enough to retire, I would have to spend a chunk of my retirement money every month to pay on my mortgage. And then that would be cutting into my ability to live and enjoy my retirement. And I'm just one person. And I can see that. I can see the problem with these things. But see, Donald Trump is floating it out there like it's some big win. It's a harebrained idea trying to make it sound like he's doing something to help the American people. Now, will it lower your mortgage rate, like as far as how much you pay every month? Yeah, it will lower your payment. But ultimately, it is going to cost you way more money overall. And it is going to cost, uh, you know, it's going to be just so much uh, longer that you are in debt. And then if you pass on before it's paid off, you better hope you have enough life insurance to pay off that mortgage. And or that the people you leave your house to is going to be able to take over the mortgage and get a mortgage on the house in their name. So that way you can, they can get it for as far as inheriting wealth. Now, some people will say, well, if you take out the 50-year loan, just refinance it after 20 years and get like a 10-year loan or something. You realize it's with it being amortized out over 50 years, it's not that simple because you start back over with front loaded interest. And sure, maybe you get a better interest rate, but the problem still remains that you have to keep paying on it for so long. It's not a good idea. You're just putting things off and hoping for a better outcome. But see, that's what Donald Trump does. Donald Trump comes up with these solutions to problems. They're not great solutions, but then he keeps doubling and tripling them down on it because he has to believe he is the smartest person in the room. And that he wants you to believe that he knows more than everybody else so that uh, you go along with it. So people cheer him and do all of these things. This is just a bad idea coming from somebody who has been known to have issues with credit and banks, etc. It's not great, but there's going to be a section of this country that's going to think it's a great idea because all they heard was lower mortgage payments. That's all they'll hear, and they're going to think it's a good idea because it came from Donald Trump. All right. Donald Trump turned around and he pardoned a bunch of his co-conspirators when it came to January 6th and the fake elector scheme and everything related to that from the 2020 election. People like Rudy Giuliani, they all got pardons. Um, Now, why would he give them pardons? Well, in part because they're loyal to him. And he thinks by giving them pardons, it is going to protect him from any potential criminality here. Now, he gave them all pardons. So that way, he's hoping that when he is out of office, because he believes he's going to live long enough to get out of office, they can't testify against him, or they won't testify against him when it comes to his role in everything related to it. Here's the problem: presidential pardons only apply to federal crimes. A bunch of them, including Rudy Giuliani, specifically in Arizona, are still facing state level charges. And they've said, don't care about the presidential pardon. They're going to go through, and he's still going to be facing criminal prosecution, specifically for Rudy Giuliani. But some of the others as well, they're all going to be facing prosecution at state, potentially for state level offenses. That doesn't make them go away. Now, uh, Donald Trump is wanting to pardon anybody connected to him. He's been floating this idea of pardoning Ghislaine Maxwell. But then he gets asked other times about people he's pardoned, and he has got no idea who they're even talking about. So makes you wonder, are all of these pardons actually signed by Donald Trump? You know, he likes to accuse Joe Biden of using the auto pen. Are they using an auto pen for Donald Trump and signing things? Or is he putting stuff in front of him saying, hey, you need to sign this, and not telling him what it is about, or telling him correctly about what it's there for, and he just signs it not knowing? When I think about that, the image that pops in my head, and I hate to compare the two, is if you've ever seen MASH, and if you're over a certain age, you know exactly what I'm going to go with here. I think in the first three seasons, you have McLean Stevens playing Henry Blake, and he was not a good commanding officer, but Radar O'Reilly could come in, hand him almost anything, and just say, "Here, you need to sign this," and not tell him what it is, and he'd sign it. Or he'd tell him, "Oh yeah, it's this thing," and he'd sign it. Or cover something and, "Oh, it's top secret." Well, you must know, you're signing it, sir. And when I think about Donald Trump being misdirected about what he is signing, that is the image that comes to mind. But he's pardoning all of his co-conspirators from January 6th. Now, this he's issued way more pardons than Joe Biden ever did. Um, and it's going to just continue to be a thing. He's trying to protect himself from things that will happen afterward. But there are still state cases that are going through. You have Arizona, you have Georgia, um, and I'm not even sure where else was looking into the fake electors cases. Um, those are still going to continue to go through. Now, because of the fact that they were given pardons, if they end up holding any sort of congressional hearing on anything related to anything about this matter, if they were to bring it back, guess what? They can't plead the fifth because they've now been pardoned for anything going on with it. They can't face federal prosecution. They can't plead the fifth. That makes it more challenging for Donald Trump. And it also makes you wonder. Remember, there was some talk that Rudy Giuliani was directing people to uh, Donald Trump for pardons, and it was I think it was $1 million or $2 million to get added to the list or something like that. Um, I remember there was a scandal that came out about it after Donald Trump was out of office about him effectively selling pardons, and now Rudy Giuliani gets a pardon. Did it come on the backside with some kind of a donation from somebody? Maybe. We know it didn't come from Rudy Giuliani. Giuliani's effectively broke. Last I heard, almost everything he owned was being uh, transferred over to the two election workers from Georgia that he defamed when he was lying about them cheating in the Georgia election in 2020, saying that they were passing flash drives back and forth with ballots and adding ballots to the register and this and that with no proof. But that's who these people are. They turn around, they say all these things, and they do all of it with the intention of, they know at least a certain section of this country is going to believe them. And they did when it came to the fake electors in Georgia, or these two election workers, I should say. with Rudy Giuliani saying they were passing ballots. We still occasionally get MAGA coming up talking about that example and pointing to that as some kind of voter fraud problem when it was never anything that really happened. And they didn't, Rudy Giuliani just said it one day, looked at a video and said with authority what he was doing. But see, he only would ever say it outside of a courtroom. He never said it inside the courtroom because then he would have to say it under oath, and that would become perjury and lying to the court. And he could be facing contempt of court charges and a whole bunch of other problems. And ultimately, he ended up losing his law license over what he did with the fake electors case. So, not surprised Donald Trump pardoned his co conspirators. I think he's trying to get something out of this in order to make things better for himself. So, uh, that's going to do it for the Analytical Iowan podcast for today. We're still watching how things progress with the House with this budget vote and how things are going to go if they end up ultimately um, passing the bill as it came to them from the Senate, or do they amend it and tack on things like the Affordable Care Act credits? We'll see. And we're also going to watch and see what happens with this vote that was promised in December for the Affordable Care Act subsidies and things like that. If the Democrats get what they want out of this and ultimately prove victorious, I will call them out for it and saying, yeah, okay, you guys were right. If it fails, I'll do the exact opposite, call them out for failing because we need to keep the pressure on them. I just hope they didn't squander whatever momentum they had going into the midterms because we were thinking that they could take the House by 40 to 50 seats and maybe flip the Senate. I just hope this shutdown fight and them caving right now, especially if the Affordable Care Act subsidies go away, that they don't end up costing themselves the midterms, completely screwing everything up. Because there's going to be a lot of people pissed when their insurance is way more expensive next year. I know there are people in my comments that say they get their insurance from the exchanges and they won't be able to afford it without the subsidies. And I don't have an answer for them right now. I don't know what to tell them other than the things I've come up with as a potential way that this resolves, hoping that the Democrats had some long term strategy and we're actually going to be able to pull it off and get those credits saved for next year. But we'll have to see how that plays out this week. Hopefully, the government shutdown will not go on much more than a few more days. But it's politics. We'll have to see if they actually can come to any sort of an agreement. So that's going to do it for the Analytical Iowan podcast today. I want to thank you for listening to me today, and we'll be back tomorrow with even more because there's always something to talk about.